This right here is my dream Landcruiser, 1060 horsepower coilover swapped 80 series. Probably the highest horsepower street driven Landcruiser in Australia, and definitely the toughest 80 getting around. Now, a whole bunch of you guys have recently come onto the channel, new subscribers. We figured it was the perfect opportunity for you guys and the existing old guard subscribers to run you through this thing now that it's completely finished in intricate detail. Everything from engine specifications, interior, exterior, top to bottom, inside and out. Now, if you do want to go back and watch every single part of this car get built in intricate details, you can go back and watch it on the channel. We documented this thing over the past sort of 18 to 24 months from a stock original, all factory one owner vehicle into what you see here today. And yes, the elephant in the room, it is currently filthy, in terrible condition. And that's because you would have just seen we had this thing off-road, abused the arse out of it, wheeling, and we just got it off the trailer. And I wanted to show you guys that this thing has survived and that, well, yeah, it gets used and abused. So let's dive into it. We'll start at the front, we'll work our way through this thing. Up the front of this car, probably the most iconic bit of bar work you'll see on an 80 series. This was all done by Kinsella's Customs in Sydney. This bar is super tight to the vehicle. It's super aggressive, a 3-hoop design. You'll probably notice that there is currently no winch in here. That is because we opted for a massive intercooler instead of being able to fit a winch. It was a little bit of a last minute thing. We had a winch in there, needed to put a big intercooler in there, winch had to come out. We're working on it, don't worry about it. GME fold down aerial. We got the GME whip as well, which is sick, little addition. We've got the retro stripes on the aerial too. Coming down here, Matty's Flexi custom grille with NGTY etched into it, sort of reminiscent of the original Naughty 40, which got stolen a couple of years ago. We won't talk about that, it's all very sad. We've got a plethora of Light Force amber lights on this car. I think it sets it off really, really well with that whole retro theme. We've also got the quad bush doof LED chasing headlights too. We also have those halos set at the same sort of tan color as the wrap. I think it looks absolutely super, super sick. It wraps around to some custom scrubbies, down into some custom sliders, into some custom rear scrubbies, and into the Kinsella's Customs rear bar. We'll talk more about that later, but it is all integrated. I think it's really, really tough the way it wraps around the side and protects all those susceptible sort of bits. Moving on to the bonnet, this was a custom VDJ DPF bonnet made by Wildside Garage. Up on the roof, we've got some roof runner crossbars and a Daci 270 freestanding awning. Overall, this thing is quite practical, as you would have seen on Morton and a couple of other camping trips. That awning gets used all the freaking time, and I think the bonnet is definitely one of the best aesthetic additions you can do to an 80 series. It just sort of modernizes a little bit and gives it a really tough, aggressive front end compared to the factory sort of rounded, bulbous bonnet that the 80 series do have. For those keen-eyed viewers, you'll see that this wrap actually has a little retro details on each upright inside the bonnet scoop vent there. So it's all these sort of little intricate details that you might not see in episodes, and unless you've seen the car at full drive shows, you'd quite easily miss. Anyway, let's talk about the thing that everyone wants to know about, and that's the 1000 horsepower engine. There's plenty to talk about. Under the bonnet, this is where the party piece of this whole car is. The 1065 horsepower, 1300 Newton meter turbo 1FZ. Now, the obvious, you know, engine swap for these things, LS, Barra, something like an FTE. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to go against the norm. We wanted to show you what a Toyota 1FZ could do. This not only bolted into the factory bell housing, bolted into the factory engine mounts, but just fit. It's meant to be in there. From an engineering perspective and an ease of parts perspective, this was the obvious choice to ruffle a few feathers. The beautiful thing about a 1FZ is they came factory in 80 series, they came factory in 105 series, and they came factory in Toyota forklifts. So the fact that a forklift engine can make 1000 plus horsepower is pretty fucking epic. We built this engine top to bottom, inside and out, with the help of Hayden and Max at HD Automotive. We tuned it at 8-speed on their hub dyno with John from Next Up Performance. This thing was a combination of insane amounts of R&D, not just in Australia, but also from people over in the United Arab Emirates, but also combining a whole bunch of knowledge that the guys at HD Automotive have, I guess, sort of read up on and discussed over the past sort of 5 years that they've been doing these sorts of things. So, for starters, the most obvious thing is that this is a 105 1FZ, so not the 80 series 1FZ. These are factory ignition coil. The 80 series ones are distributor, so they're really not a good thing to start with. We started with this. It's a 4.5 litre straight six. This particular run runs about 36, 34 pounds of boost and is on E85, pretty much straight. Can be flex fueled if it needs to be, but we're not cowards. We just run it on E85. Starting from the bottom of this thing and working our way up, it's still the factory 4.5 litre capacity, factory crank and factory main caps. We've got an ARP main cap bolts, ARP conrod bolts, ARP head studs, ARP everything we could possibly. ACL race bearings, we've got forged full rods, Ross Racing pistons. We've got an MLS head gasket in there, obviously those head studs as well. So the bottom end is super indestructible, super reliable, can put up to a whole bunch of abuse. These things take a massive amount of oil too. So there's a lot of oil going around there. We did a brand new genuine oil pump and a whole bunch of bits and pieces like that, genuine thermostat, all that sort of gear to keep it reliable and keep it safe, tried and proven. Moving up to the head, we have got upgraded valve springs, oversized valves, both intake and exhaust. We've got the biggest stage 3 Kelfer turbo 1FZ cams that they make. It gives it an insane choppy, lumpy idle and works really well for the drivability and bringing this thing onto boost. Up the top, we've got coil-on plug ignition system. These are actually out of a V6 Camry and seem to work really well in FZs. We've got spark plugs, obviously, up the top there. We've welded on some A-end breather fittings which go to the Raceworks catch cam. We've got a Platinum Racing Products billet filler cap here too. On this side of the engine, a 6-boost high mount turbo exhaust manifold. Already rusting. The 6-boost coating is shit. If you're going to do something like this, go and get it ceramic coated yourself because this is garbage. The turbo over here is a Pulsar PSR G42 1450. So around a 1400 horsepower rated turbo, a 5-inch intake pipe on it, massive Raceworks pod filter, 4-inch dump out the back, which goes through a really intricate exhaust system that Max fabbed up at HD while he was still there. We've got either a system with a valve from Racecraft that dumps it straight at the side here. So if you really want to get into party mode, you can have it dumping straight there and make maximum power. Or if you're running around the street, flick a switch on the Haltech keypad and it'll actually switch a valve and divert it up over the gearbox, up over the transfer case, through a muffler and out the back of the car through a 3-inch system. So really clever the way he's done that. On your side, you'll see that we have a custom alloy welding forward-facing intake plenum, which is welded onto a set of ProFlow intake manifold runners. We've got a ProFlow stainless custom fuel rail as well, and we're utilizing some Raceworks 1650cc E85 short length straight feed injectors. We've also got the Raceworks billet flex fuel sensor. We've got the GFB 50mm wastegate on this side, GFB flex, so the GFB fuel pressure regulator over here as well. And just in that corner of the engine bay as well, the GFB Deceptor 2 blow-off valve. All these brands were so helpful to us throughout this entire build process. Wouldn't have been able to do it without them. A couple of other bits and pieces worth mentioning. We've got the Raceworks aluminium overflow cap, overflow bottle, sorry. We've got the Raceworks power steering reservoir over there. All our flex fuel sensors and fuel pressure management is mounted on the firewall up over here. Over on this side, we've got a whole lot of heat management because this thing pumps some heat. 1,000 horsepower and a 4-inch dump pipe in a very tight engine bay made it a little bit tricky. So we've got the Raceworks turbo beanie, we've got the Raceworks exhaust wrap as well on the dump pipe. We've got a little bit of a heat shield and some gold heat wrap on the clutch master too. Bendix dual diaphragm booster, which is something that the engineer wanted to see to help this thing stop on a dime. We've obviously got the 5-inch intake on your side. We've got 3.5-inch intercooler piping round to over here into 3-inch. The intercooler is a 600 by 300, but 100mm thick, so a massive intercooler, which we actually went up a size. We were originally going to go a 2.5-inch thick, but we ended up having to go to that 3-inch, which is why we had to sacrifice the winch like I mentioned earlier. A couple of other interesting bits and pieces. You'll notice that there is no radiator shroud on this thing. It's still a viscous hub and factory fan and a factory radiator. Might be upgrading to a PWR shortly. But what we found was that under massive torquing up sort of situations, the fan was hitting the shroud, snapping blades off and putting it through radiators. So even though we sort of welded some limiting straps on the factory engine mount so that it had a little bit of movement but would stop from going too far, we were still having that issue with it destroying radiators. So as of right now, and for the past 2,000 Ks that this car's been driven, we haven't had a shroud and it does not get hot and the radiator fan is no longer touching and destroying radiators. So I think that's sort of the best we could come up with. Other things worth mentioning is it's all controlled by a Haltech. We've got Haltech O2 sensors, we've got Haltech NOx sensors. We've converted it to a Raceworks and Bosch Motorsport drive-by-wire throttle body. Again, all controlled through the Haltech IC7 dash and the Haltech Elite 2500 standalone ECU. All the sensors are Haltech. We've got a Haltech premium universal wiring loom as well. And we also did the best sort of job at wiring tuckers we could in here to keep it all nice. You'll see a lot of the wiring is run on the inner guards here above these rolled up custom wheel arches that we got put in here. It was really, really difficult to put all the stuff that we needed to in this space because of the coilovers. Massive, insane suspension setup in this car, which we're about to talk about, but that's what made us sort of have to try and keep it all very compact. And you'll see that the intake manifold is really quite short, and the turbo, actually, the rear housing touches just about on the rocker cover, which was powder coated by a mate of ours. So it's a really compact, tight system, but it works really well and has been infinitely reliable thus far, and hopefully remains reliable for a long, long time to come. Huge shout out to, you know, HD Automotive, Platinum Racing, Raceworks, GFB, all those guys made this engine build possible. And if you want to see the step-by-steps on things like the machining and running the fuel system and exhaust, we've got all those episodes on the channel. I'm sure I'll put the playlist link in the description of this video. If you're wondering why I'm perspiring so much, it is because it is so hot in Queensland right now. And this engine bay is pumping heat out as we speak, but that's fine. I love what I do. Anyway, let's jump around the other side of the car. I want to talk to you guys about the wheels, tires, and suspension setup, and a bit more about the braking systems on this car, because it is all pretty freaking impressive. Okay, wrapping around the side of the car, you can see a bit more of that retro theme on the wrap. I absolutely love it to death. Kinsella's Customs with this insanely strong looking scrub rail, which has absolutely copped a hiding over the past couple of sessions out in the bush. Roll bar joiners front and back, so it's really easy to remove. You can actually see here, normally there would be guard and flare right down here on the 80 series. We've cut about 4 inches of guard out of the way and raised the entire guard height up high and cut it all out and clearance it. So the 37s can flex entirely through the coilovers range of movement without fouling on anything. These custom rolled guards from Kinsella's Customs too are a really good thing as well, as stop any shrapnel, rocks, mud, dirt and dust getting up into the engine bay in places it shouldn't be. Now, wheels, tires, suspension, at least in the front of this vehicle, it's a long list, bear with me. Obvious, starting with the Maxxis Trepadors. These are the M8060 Treps, the stickies, bias supply, 37 by 12.5, 17-inch ROH Zulo rim. It's a 17 by 9 neg 22 offset on a GU Dwiz sheet metal housing. Now, that's a broad stroke. Let's get into the nitty gritty. We pushed the wheelbase forward in this car about 2 inches. Whilst doing that, we fitted a GU steering box on that side and also went custom everything. Custom panhard mount. It's got custom 3-link in the front using Hillfab alloy hand-turned links. So 3-link basically means we've got 1 link up the top of the diff controlling the roll and just 2 small aluminium links on the lower side. This is to basically get the maximum amount of suspension articulation and least binding you can possibly have in a car. It's Heims on both ends, the diff and the chassis end. Yes, it's noisy. Do I care? No. It's a 1,000 horsepower race truck. Noise and, you know, NVH and shit doesn't freaking bother me. We've got 14-inch Bilstein coilovers in the front, handmade by the team at Heisman's and Bilstein Australia in Sydney. They are a 14-inch travel by 2.5-inch body. Absolutely massive. We've got twin iBark springs on there. We've also got 4-inch by 2-inch hydraulic bump stops in the front and rear of this car. This thing is an absolute flex monster. You can see why we had to put the shock towers up so high, because we have such a long shock, so much travel. And then we got that brace running across the engine to stop those long towers from ever bending in. The Dwiz housing is from a GU Patrol. It's really cool. It's an Australian manufactured housing using chromoly sleeves on the inside of it to give it its strength and a huge amount of oil capacity, so you're never going to have an issue. We've got a 4.1 GU front diff in there with a Harrop e-locker as well. Never had an issue. Absolutely love it to death. It works really, really well. We've got slotted rotors. We've got the best brake pads we could find, and we've got the factory GU part-time hub still on this vehicle. It works really well. I absolutely love how this car drives. We've got custom sway bars front and rear. When we go wheeling, we take the front one out. When we're driving it around on the street, we take the front one and put it back in, and it keeps this thing driving super, super sick. You can probably tell that some of the logistical nightmares of trying to fit massive intercooler piping and suspension in a road-going car and keeping it look like a vehicle that should be on the road was really difficult. Kinsella's has managed to make it happen. We also, whilst we were doing all this stuff, we had the cab off the chassis, we braced the entire chassis, reinforced all the new mounts, and then got it sandblasted and painted. There isn't a single factory Toyota suspension mount left on this frame. It is all custom. It is all one-off bespoke stuff. By pushing the wheelbase forward in the front suspension of this vehicle, it made it really difficult to still be able to fit the bracing, the sway bar, the panhard, the steering box and everything, but Matt and the team at Kinsella's Customs got it done, and it's an absolute work of art. They've absolutely nailed this thing. It drives so well. It's a testament to what you can actually achieve when you get a little bit crazy here in Australia from the engineering and manufacturing point of view. Anyway, moving down the side of the vehicle, you can see we've got those custom Kinsella's scrubbies. They have copped an absolute hiding in the back of the vehicle. We've got the sliders that kick up, protect the vehicle. Let's go up the back. We'll talk about the rear suspension as well because it gets super fruity up there. Then we can dive in and take a look at the interior. When I said there was no nut and bolt that we left untouched on this car, I did truly mean it. The rear suspension is a work of art in itself as well. Whilst I'm here, I'm going to quickly touch on a couple of other driveline bits and pieces that I might not have mentioned earlier. The gearbox, you're probably thinking it must be some kind of crazy custom built automatic. Boom, you're wrong. Factory 5-speed manual out of this very same car. 500,000 kilometer Toyota gearbox, absolutely loving life. The front CVs and axles, still factory out of a Nissan. The rear axles, still factory out of a Toyota. The rear diff in this car is still an 80 series diff. Absolutely insane. I can't believe it's held up to the abuse it has. How long for? Well, look, let's just touch wood and hope for the best. The front shaft is custom from the team at Farrow's Shafts. Obviously, they had to adapt the diff end to a GU, but the transfer case end is still a Toyota. And the rear shaft is actually a modified 70 series shaft, so a bit more strength, but not so much that it would just kill diffs. We sort of still wanted it to be a bit of a fuse in the system. Back here, we drilled out the axle studs. They've all been upgraded to 10 mil, and that's about it in terms of diff and driveline upgrades. We've got, again, the 37-inch Maxxis Treps on those ROH Zulo beadlock rims. Absolutely beautiful looking wheel. Have had no dramas. Massive fan of this. In the back, we have a double triangulated 4-link suspension setup from the team at Kinsella's. Again, using those hand-turned Hill Fab aluminium links. And you're probably thinking, there's no way you can fit a long coilover in the back of a wagon. You're wrong. We've got 14-inch Bilstein coilovers and those same 4-inch bump stops in the back of this thing. In the back, for fuel, we have a modified VDJ dual cab tank. It's about 110, 120 litres of capacity with a couple of Raceworks pumps in there. We also have a sway bar that mounts to behind or sort of underneath the tow bar, runs forward with some really long sway bar links as well to help control everything. Everything on this car was done intentionally with high clearance in mind. And I think the end result is absolutely phenomenal. You'll also see these rear scrubbies have copped an absolute hiding. We've got the factory flare still, trimmed it all to fit up because obviously the flare moves with the door in an 80 series. So you have to do a little bit of trimming to make it all work, but the end result is a work of art. It's so hot. I'm going crazy. Let's jump inside and we'll talk about interior. Now, if you couldn't tell already by now, this car has sort of been inspired by those dune bashers over in the United Arab Emirates. You see them hanging out their vehicles, doing big sand dune tip-ins and skids through the dunes, you know, cool vintage wraps and all that sort of stuff. So that's exactly where this car was sort of always destined to go. Now, my mate Henry at SRK Upholstery down in Sydney had this cooked idea to do tan leather interior with orange stitching. And at first I was like, man, that is going to be absolutely crazy looking. And then he did it and it works so well. Up the front on a set of Hurricane Fabrication rails, we've got XR Falcon seats that have been completely retrimmed in this gorgeous Napa leather, albeit filthy because we just got back from wheeling, but it looks so, so gorgeous. We've got perforated center inserts as well. He refoamed all the bolsters. They're like brand new seats. They're super comfy and you get a little bit more sort of lateral support when you are wheeling. And the factory wheel, again, he trimmed and did the horn pad as well in that beautiful same leather with the orange stitching. Absolutely phenomenal work. The inside of this car is pretty simple. It was, you know, always going to be just nice to look at, simple and effective. In front of the driver's seat here, we've got the Haltech IC7 digital dash, which is obviously always speaking to the Haltech Elite 2500 ECU, which is mounted just to the left of the glove box. This tells me everything. Things like oil temp, coolant temp, manifold, boost pressure, oil pressure, the wideband, what the battery's doing, GPS speed, tacho, fuel level. We got the Haltech to talk to the fuel sender as well. You know, your air temp, also your ethanol content. So you know exactly what sort of percentage ethanol it is at because we have that flex fuel. When it's on, you know, about 30% ethanol content, it's like 700-800 horsepower right up to that 1100 horsepower mark. It's actually pretty stupid. but I love it. We'll never have it any other way. Coming over here, we've actually got a PDI short shifter fitted as well, so that just helps snapping gears that little bit nicer, and it gives it a really nice notchy, positive feeling shift engagement. Handbrake we need to do something with, that's all right, that's a future issue. We've got the Haltech cam pad down here as well, so that's controlling things like your boost up, boost down, exhaust valve shut and open, anti-lag, 2-step, and your fuel pump manual override as well, so you can run it flat out. And we've also got the Polaris double din head unit 2, wireless CarPlay, Android Auto. Absolutely epic bit of kit. Definitely one of the first things you should do to any car, to be quite honest with you, because it makes the drivability so much easier. Your phone connects, you can see where you're going, you're not breaking the law, etc. The back seats are the factory 80 series seats. They have been completely retrimmed as well. They've got the perforated leather inserts too. They still fold down. They look absolutely phenomenal. They've got the orange stitching too. Otherwise, the interior is pretty factory, pretty standard. We've got no sound deadening in here. We've got no heat management in here. The aircon doesn't work too well in here. It's pretty basic, but it does all it needs to do, you know? I really love driving this thing. It's such a cool car. People, they snap their heads when you're rolling around in it. And you know, being an 80 series, it's good. It's got disc brakes, coil suspension, obviously from factory, albeit modified now, electric windows, electric mirrors, you know, all those sorts of things. And things like your demister still work, your center diff lock still works. It all still works. It's still really cool. It's like a fully functioning road legal car in here. So really love that. But that's pretty much it for the interior. We do have to mount the GME XRS Connect somewhere in here at some point. There's a couple of bits and pieces we do still need to do, but that's all right. All in good time. All right, in the boot of the car, again, simple, but this is another one of the party tricks, you know? It sort of goes hand in hand with the ridiculous engine, and people at the shows and stuff look in the boot and they're just mind blown and mind boggled, and that's what I do this for. Over here, we have a Billet Raceworks bracket that fits the Optima battery perfectly. Again, all the wiring and stuff, all your main fuses, we relocated into this storage panel in the back. Over here, where the factory jack should be, is the Raceworks washer bottle. That's right. That's right, it's crazy the amount of cool shit that Max did in the back of this car. You can also see these Kinsella Customs coilover towers coming up through the floor of the boot from the chassis into the car with the remote canisters of the bill stands mounted on top of it. And then we have that 2.8 litre or 2.5 litre Raceworks surge tank with 2 fuel filters in there, 2 fuel pumps rather, sorry. Also worth mentioning, we've got a Billet Raceworks, I think it's a 10 micron fuel filter on the fuel system as well. No way we're ever going to pick up bad fuel, and if we do, we know about it to protect the engine. The back of here is super sick. I love having these lift up windows, because if we do ever need to get to the battery and the back of the car is backed up into an awkward spot on the tracks, we can, and it's all super simple to access to and everything like that. Especially if you need to adjust the coilovers, you can sit in the boot and wind them up and down. So it really is a cool little setup. People love this. It's absolutely sick. The downside is, as you can probably tell, there's a whole lot of dirt and rocks that get flicked up when you're wheeling or you're rally packing through a gravel road. In an ideal world, I would love to build a sort of box that could bolt in over this and sort of help keep the elements out, but it's so cool. It's so sick. I love this. Not overly practical, but nothing about this car is. It's not about practicality. It's about showcasing Australian engineering and how far you can push those limits. The back of the car, worth mentioning a couple of my favorite features that I absolutely love and is a very hot topic on the internet and at the shows. For starters, if you know, you know. If you don't, I don't give a shit. Rear wing on wagons looks cool. On the GQ, we've got the other side Metalworks one. On the 80s, you can rock these plastic ABS ones that are available on eBay. Very hard to track down. They're like $300. Feels like it should be illegal to pay that much for a piece of plastic, but it is what it is. And they sell like 20 a year, and then they list them as out of stock until the next year. They're really hard to find, but if you can get your hands on them, I think it finishes the back of an 80 series really well. We've got the aftermarket LED taillights on either side, also integrated taillights and indicators in the rear bar. The rear bar is from Kinsella's. He now does these as an off-the-shelf option, whilst this one was a custom one. You can too have the coolest looking 80 series in the business if you want to look like daddy. A lot of people mount them as like, you know, a spare on one side and jerry cans on the other, or 2 spares or 2 jerrys or whatever they might do. I think for a wagon to look gangster, the back of it has to be symmetrical. Otherwise, it really irks me. So we went with the center-mounted full-size trep on the beadlock rim, and I think it looks absolutely sick. I would never have a wagon like this that's going to be purely off-road without something like this. If you're going to be driving the car and touring in it like the GQ, sweet. I get the value in carrying jerry cans, but for something like this, the center-mounted spare was absolutely what we were going to do. And then if you look down here, you can actually see that we integrated the tow hitch, like a 50mm receiver, in through the bar, and through that chassis. And then we have a tow bar sort of designed mechanism thing up behind the chassis rail in there too. So you can actually run a tow hitch on this car. You can run a recovery hitch. You can do all those sorts of things. You can even run safety chains and put the shackles in under there. So there really is a practical thought process to everything that Matt Kinsella does. And I think the end result speaks for itself. Another thing worth mentioning is the whole car was tinted as well early on in the wrap process. I think it's around 20% on the entire thing. Helps sort of give it that blackout look and stops it looking like a fishbowl. All right, that was a pretty in-depth look at Australia's toughest Landcruiser. Certainly one of the most high horsepower four-wheel drives you'll ever see cruising the streets of Australia, that's for damn sure. Now, if you want to see this thing getting absolutely abused off-road, go check out last week's episode, because the spring certainly took a toll on this beastie, and I don't think it'll ever quite look or drive the same again. Now, hopefully you've enjoyed this in-depth look at this car. It is really a work of art, and the whole intent when we set out to build this thing wasn't practicality. It was just to showcase what is possible if you let your mind just go absolutely free. And we really pushed the limits of everyone involved in this build. And I think the end result is just something that everyone can be proud of. I'm certainly proud of. And getting to own and drive this thing is just about the coolest part of my job, that's for damn sure. If you have any questions, please do drop them in the comments below. I will do my best to go through and answer them on any details I might have missed. I do think we covered most things off, and if it's too technical for me to answer, I'll get Max to jump in and help me out, because he knows this thing just about as good as I do. Sorry if I look a little disheveled. It is currently, I think, the hottest day we've had for like 5 years or something here in Queensland. We're outside, there's no breeze, it is stinking hot, and I'm slowly dying in the shed. But anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed it. If you have, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, share it around, and as always, we'll be back next Thursday. Love ya. Bye.